Welcome to the Insight Meditation community of Charlottesville, Virginia. You can find all of our program offerings and information about our Sangha at www.imeditation.org. We meet weekly on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, currently on the Zoom platform for meditation and a Dharma talk given by one of our teachers. We also meet daily at noon Eastern Time on Zoom for sitting practice. We hope you can join us.
Words. Words are powerful. Words are powerful. Consider a time when someone's words literally changed your life. In a way, it's a silly question because words are constantly changing our lives, constantly. So consider when someone may be nourished or supported or inspired or guided you. When someone's words kindly challenged you about an unskillful behavior or about some kind of unwise speech or action, or maybe challenge you to move in a different direction from the path you were on, or to deepen your commitment to the path you were on. Many, many years ago, when I was quite unhappy as a nun, as a Catholic nun, I was talking to one of my mentors who very kindly said to me as I was struggling with how to stay and how to be good and how to do all this, she said, you know, you might decide to leave. And if you do, I'll support you. And for me, in that moment of struggle, where it really wasn't an option in my own mind at that moment, I was like, oh, really? That's an option? Consider a time when you spoke to yourself internally in a way that was wise, in which you nourished and supported and guided yourself. Or maybe with kind words with which you challenged yourself to do better in some way. I just had a recent experience with that, just internally, where I saw something I was doing that really wasn't so skillful. Sharon, darling, you need to cut that out. You need to cut that out. And I've been dedicated to doing just that. Words have power, both external words and internal words. Words have power. You know, if we consider the Buddha's teachings on non-separation, that all separation is a mistaken illusion, it's understandable, but it's a mistaken illusion, then words work as the vehicle for our non-separation, our loving connection, our wise connection, or alternately, they can be a vehicle for increased separation. So the Buddha invites us to remember how to use words well. which can sort of sound like, being good or something like that, like following the rules. But basically, what the teaching is how words can either aid or create obstacles for our own liberation and the liberation of others. Nevertheless, we could also imagine that the Buddha's teaching on wise speech are simple. Do this, don't do that. Indeed, sometimes the suttas seem to read that way. He says, monks, a statement endowed with 5 factors is spoken at the right time, in truth, with affection, with the intention to benefit, and with a mind of goodwill. And again, I'll give you these sutta references when the talk is posted. And so the challenge really is how to execute all of this speech internally and externally with a heart and a mind of goodwill. And even if we could technically fulfill this, let's say externally, we could say nice things. If internally we have not yet purified our hearts with respect to our words and our minds with respect to our words, it's not considered skillful speech. Ajahn Chah calls this putting a stone over a garbage pit. He said you could do that with nice words, but really it's not healing for anybody. Many of you will remember the sutta to Abhaya. I won't go into it tonight. We've talked about it a number of times before. But in the sutta, he says very clearly, he says, wise speech has 3 qualities to it. 1, it is true. 2, it is correct. And I believe he means by that it's timely, it's appropriate to the time and circumstances. And 3, that it is intended to be beneficial. True, correct, and beneficial. They keep showing up over and over again in the suttas about what is wise speech. The Buddha goes on to say, wise speech is a speech that is true, correct, beneficial, and welcome and agreeable. Okay, so far so good. However, I hope your mind is starting to consider, yeah, but what about speech that isn't welcome and agreeable? What about speech that's unwelcome and that is disagreeable? What do we do about that? In that particular sutta, the Buddha doesn't help all that much. He says, with respect to unwelcome and disagreeable speech, he says, I know how to do that. Like, okay, thanks a lot. But we all sometimes need to offer speech that is unwelcome and disagreeable. I've just recently had some challenging conversations with a young relative who asked to borrow a rather large amount of money. What constitutes wise speech? So I want to ask you for examples. Would you each, I hope you're having some questions in your own minds about but what about? True, correct, and beneficial, but what about wise speech in this circumstance? Whatever that is. Would you text me and just text me privately with some examples of what you would consider a challenging circumstance, perhaps some unwelcome and or disagreeable speech that appears to be needed. I just had a contractor who failed to show up as scheduled. That might be one. How do I navigate that? Send me some texts. Someone hurts my feelings. Someone is abusive, a boss or a partner. Telling someone that, in my humble opinion, you need to do something differently. We need to set some boundaries. Someone hasn't paid me. Had to refuse someone a job or a lease that they wanted. Telling someone that they sound racist or sexist or homophobic. Dealing with poor workmanship and company reps. We had contractors finish a fairly large job on our house when we were away, and we got home after I had paid them while I was away, only to find out that the job was not, in fact, finished. Comments to someone who likes to think they know everything. Someone isn't listening. Somebody who has explosive outbursts. Someone with politics, the opposite. It's not too hard, is it? We don't have to go too far to find those circumstances where where we wonder, what is wise speech in unwelcome and disagreeable circumstances? How do we do this? The Buddha says, speak what's true, speak what's correct, speak with an intention to be beneficial, which sounds kind of good, but what does that look like? What does it sound like? Another example, and some of you are alluding to these kinds of things, in one of the suttas, the Buddha says, others may use these 5 modes of speech when speaking to you. That their speech, other speech, might be timely or untimely. Their speech might be true or false. Other speech might be gentle or harsh. Other speech might seem to have a good or maybe even a harmful motive. And other speech may be offered with a loving heart or with hostility. So what does a mind and a heart of goodwill have to offer about these kinds of speech? And then, of course, we probably won't get to this tonight. How do we go about actually having difficult conversations? For that, there's a wonderful resource that Dan, who is here tonight, thank you, Dan, told me about, which is a book called Difficult Conversations, which I found really wise and helpful. So with respect to the challenges of unwelcome and disagreeable speech, the Buddhist very specifically says, when he's asked about it, he says there is no one-sided answer to that. Oh, here we go again. There is no one-sided answer to that. as always, if we are really paying attention, in so many ways, the teachings can bring us to deep and compelling questions and confusions. He says, how to implement this. He says there is no one-sided answer to that. I think I ended my very last talk, maybe it was the last one, by saying that if we're not confused, we're not really paying attention. We're not really considering, okay, in this circumstance, what do the teachings have to say about this? And the Buddha himself says, as you know, this Dhamma that I have attained is deep, hard to see, hard to realize, peaceful, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture. He means beyond the scope of thinking, even. Yikes. Subtle to be experienced by the wise. So the Buddha gives us a real permission there. He basically says, if you are confused, you are on the right track, because this Dhamma that I'm teaching, remember, that was his original thought about teaching at all. He said, it's just people want to understand. And he says it will be, it's something like it will be wearisome for me to teach, because people just won't understand it. It's deep, it's hard to see, it's subtle. So he invites us to take it on as path, these teachings. So here we are. We all are here, or you're all doing that, or you wouldn't be here. So back to the Abhaya Sutta, which is the one that says speech that is true, correct, and beneficial. You will notice that even with unwelcome and disagreeable speech, the possibility that unwelcome and disagreeable speech could be untrue, inappropriately timed, or unbeneficial, intended to be unbeneficial, fueled by ill will, that those are not possibilities in terms of wise speech. So the speech is, a given is that it is true, correct, and intended to be beneficial, even in circumstances that are unwelcome and disagreeable, which is perhaps a relevant inquiry for these challenging times. So he does not entertain the possibility that something that is untimely or false or harsh or has a harmful motive or is offered with hostility is even an option. But nevertheless, how to do wise speech when it's unwelcome and disagreeable, he says there is no one-sided answer to that. So from many previous talks, it was one of my favorite teachings, and so I teach on it a lot, that the Buddha says, there are three kinds of wisdom. One is to hear the teachings, and one is to reflect on them, and then one is to contemplate the teachings. And so I wanted to invite you in two ways to contemplate the teachings. Now bear with me, don't panic and leave me yet. Because what I would propose you do is that you work in groups of three, and you bring, I told you about the thing, I have some flowers behind me. I told you about the thing where my husband brings me, stump the flower person flowers, where he brings me flowers that cannot possibly go together, and it's a game we play. It's like, okay, Sharon, figure out how to do this. I would invite you to stump the Buddha person. To take one of the examples, or maybe others that you come up with in your small group, and take those three qualities that the Buddha says that speech needs to be true, needs to be correct, as in timely, and needs to be beneficial. But even there, if you think about it, like with my relative, it's like, well, what's true, Sharon? There are lots of things that are true. What's wise speech? What does it mean for something to be true in that particular difficult situation? So you'll come up with some one or two or maybe three among you circumstances of difficult conversations. And I am inviting you to contemplate together what would truthful, timely, and beneficial speech, what words would offer that kind of speech in this circumstance? Okay? And just ponder together. And again, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. And so this is, somebody asked me not too long ago to offer more, deeper Dharma. And folks, this is deeper Dhamma. This place where we're invited to dive into the dilemmas that we have in applying the Dhamma to our daily lives. Let me just read to you a couple of quotes for the end. Let me just see here. We'll offer these again the next times. Remembering that it's a practice. This maybe is relevant and will lead us into our next, if we talk a little bit more about self-criticism, remembering that it's all a practice. And this is from Alan Wallace. He says, we begin with a vision of the nature of the practice, what the point of the practice is, what it is designed to yield or bring forth. Bring to mind some image. It is helpful to have a vision of what human flourishing and happiness is about. What does your own human flourishing entail? Holding that vision, we bring forth a well-wishing for ourselves. We bring forth a well-wishing for ourselves that we may cultivate these qualities through the practice. May we thrive and prosper in this. May our practice yield the fruits for which it was designed and yield our own well-being, both in solitude and in relationship to others. Let us inspire ourselves, Alan says, to engage in the practices so that these fruits may be realized.